Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. An Israeli politician has called on Benjamin Netanyahu to halt all parts of the agreement with Hamas until the remaining bodies of the hostages are returned. But Hamas says it needs specialist equipment to find them. President Trump says Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying Russian oil as he holds a call with Putin. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has survived 2 no-confidence votes in Parliament after he pledged to suspend Macron's pension plan. An Israeli politician has called on Benjamin Netanyahu to halt all parts of the agreement with Hamas until all bodies of the hostages are returned. Earlier today, the Red Cross facilitated the return of 30 more Palestinian bodies back to Gaza after Hamas handed over another 2 Israeli bodies last night. But Hamas says it needs specialist equipment to find the others. Meanwhile, Israel has reportedly given intelligence to the US, which claims to show that Hamas has access to more hostage bodies than it actually does claim. I'm now joined by Jake Wallis Simons, columnist at The Telegraph. Jake, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Quite a complex situation here. So Israel has returned the bodies of 30 Palestinians to Gaza. As mentioned, Hamas is facing challenges in finding the remaining hostage bodies. Does this highlight the complex challenges of achieving what is outlined in this peace plan?
I think it's not true necessarily to say that Hamas is facing challenges, but it's certainly true to say that Hamas is claiming to face challenges. The truth is we just don't know. What we do know is that we cannot trust the word of Hamas. It has lied throughout this conflict. And of course, as a jihadi organization equivalent to Islamic State, everything it says should be taken with a pinch of salt. But certainly we can assume that there are certain challenges that it does face. We just don't know the scale of them. Either way, I think the implementation of this plan is a huge challenge for the international community, because Hamas does not want to lay down its arms. It does not want to give up power in the Gaza Strip to any kind of international body. It doesn't want to fade into obscurity. They are a group of jihadists who will only rest when their goal of destroying Israel has been achieved. And so they are an implacable enemy. It's difficult to see how any compromise can truly be arrived at with them.
And it's interesting, Jake, because Israel demands their return, but senior US advisors are downplaying the concerns on the ceasefire collapsing, saying Hamas intends to honor the deal. Are President Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu currently on the same page when it comes to this deal and peace?
This is a very fluid situation, and relations between Trump and Netanyahu are complex and evolving and often seem to involve tension as well as alliances. But you don't really know how the public face stacks up against what's said behind closed doors. A pattern does seem to have emerged over the past few months where Netanyahu plays the role of the big stick and Trump plays the role of the good cop, if you like. And that seems to be occurring again at the moment, with Netanyahu vowing that Hamas will comply with all the terms of the deal or else. And while Trump has echoed that rhetoric sometimes, at other times, like you say, officials in the American administration seem to be playing this down. So, like I say, it's very complex, it's very fluid. We're not dealing with an ordinary administration in the US, if ordinary means Biden, Obama, and all the others. We're dealing with something entirely different that plays by different rules. And I think that really we'll just have to wait and see as how Israel and America will respond to Hamas playing games of this sort.
And the UN is calling for more aid to enter Gaza, and Oxfam says aid should not be a bargaining chip. What is the impact of Israel's refusal to reopen the Rafah crossing?
Well, the Rafah crossing, of course, was never agreed to allow aid to go through. That was agreed in the plan to be the role of the Kerem Shalom crossing and other crossings. Rafah was only ever going to be opened to personnel, not to aid. We understand that there are negotiations going on between Israel and Egypt and others to open that crossing within the next few days, but no date has been agreed just yet. But yes, you're right. Overall, Israel is holding aid as one of the elements of the agreement, which can be withheld if Hamas doesn't play its part. Let's not be under any misapprehensions here. People are not starving in Gaza. There is enough food to eat in Gaza. But the influx of more aid would obviously be better for the Gazans. But the problem is that it would also be better for Hamas, who tends to still have a monopoly over distribution of aid to some extent. And indeed the seizure and selling of aid. Aid has always worked in Hamas's advantage with respect to selling it to the population, getting money to pay its fighters, keep itself in power. And that's really the lever that Israel is trying to deprive the jihadis from pulling at the moment in an attempt to pressure them to release the bodies of the hostages.
And another topic that I've seen around a lot, and people are trying to get the details about, what more do we actually know about President Trump's international stabilization force in Gaza? Lots of talk about it.
Yeah, the details are very hazy even now. The genius, if you like, of Donald Trump was to get all parties to agree to the first phase, i.e. to get the hostages out, which was the main objective for Israel to end the war, and then leave the further stages open to negotiation. Now, this international stabilization force, we know, will be commanded by the United States. There is a new CENTCOM base actually in Gaza itself. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff visited it on the ground when they were in Israel recently. About 200 American personnel will be overseeing this force, although we understand they won't actually be based in Gaza themselves. They'll be overseeing it from outside of there. And the countries that are expected to take part in terms of providing boots on the ground include Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, possibly Indonesia, maybe even Azerbaijan. But none of that has been officially confirmed yet. From Israel's point of view, of course, that range of countries provides a range of possible threats. I mean, Turkey is very hostile to Israel and is becoming more and more hostile under the authoritarian reign of Erdogan with each passing year. So having Turkish boots on the ground will be a different matter from having Indonesian boots on the ground or indeed Egyptian or Qatari boots on the ground. They all have different significances, and the details have not yet been worked out, but we do know it will be an American-led operation.
So speaking earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated Israel will achieve all goals of the Gaza war, and whoever lays a hand on us knows they will pay a very heavy price. Who exactly is he warning?
Well, Israel has no shortage of enemies to warn. Of course, Iran is down but not out. It definitely needs to heed that warning if it returns to financing and manipulating forces around Israel, proxy forces, to be hostile to the Jewish state. So that will be number one. Qatar, again, I mean, Qatar, there's been a sort of rapprochement between Qatar and Netanyahu after he apologized under pressure from Donald Trump in order to get this peace deal or ceasefire deal over the line. But Qatar perhaps came to the table and began to cooperate because of that recent strike, Israeli strike on Qatar, that made them fear that they were not able to operate with impunity anymore. So a veiled warning perhaps to them and to others. Of course, Hamas remains a force, although albeit a much reduced force, a force to be reckoned with in Gaza. They need to be warned as well. Hezbollah recently has been trying to rearm itself and reassert itself in southern Lebanon. Israel has had to carry out some airstrikes in the in southern Lebanon to cause it to be unable to build up its forces. So warnings essential there. And of course, the Houthis still firing the occasional rocket at Israel as well. So warnings there. So there's no shortage of addresses for this warning to arrive at, let's put it that way. But of course, Israel is in a more mighty security position, defense position now than at any time since the 1967 Six-Day War. And it looks like it intends to retain that military advantage come hail or high water.
Jake Wallis Simons, always good to have you on the show. Thank you for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
President Trump has said Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying Russian oil. Trump's also holding a phone call with Putin ahead of Zelensky's visit tomorrow. Here's a reminder of what Donald Trump told reporters about Modi.
No, we were not happy with him buying oil from Russia, because that lets Russia continue on with this ridiculous war where they've lost 1.5 million people, by the way. Russia's lost 1.5 million people, soldiers mostly. This is a war that should have never started, but it's a war that Russia should have won in the first week, and they're going into the 4th year. And I want to see it stop. So I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop.
I'm now joined by journalist Leigh-Ann Gerrans. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Great to have you back on the show, Leigh-Ann. Let's talk a little bit, pleasure, about India's foreign ministry said it's not aware of any phone call between Narendra Modi and Donald Trump on Wednesday. Is this a challenging moment for US and India relations?
The challenging moment for India and US relations in this year started much before. I think it all started, not all, but it was simmering, but it has been added on to when India did not agree to the claim that President Trump made of having stopped the war between India and Pakistan. And then when Pakistan floated the idea of him being one of the person to win contenders for Nobel Peace Prize, India did not agree. And then tariffs came and India went and joined hands with China and Brazil through BRICS. And instead of bowing down, it really came on stronger with the rhetoric of made in India. So I think it's been going on for a while. This only adds on, and we'll see what kind of tariffs and HSB2C, whatever happens later now as we go along, because clearly there was no phone call as India claims.
Why has India refused to bow down to America's demands to stop buying Russian oil? Narendra Modi has not succumbed to this demand.
I think why should India bow down to anything for anyone? I mean, it is at this stage in its, let's say, life, if we may call it. It is touted to be the third largest economy by 2028. It has a huge market. It's one of the consistently economy that is delivering consistently 67% despite all that's happening. It has a huge market. So it has a lot to offer. Stable democracy that's been going on since it got its independence. So it has a lot to offer at this point in time. And they don't need, and they have, India has over a period of time positioned even more strongly and has pushed its agenda of non-alignment very strongly in saying that we work to our interests. So I don't know why they should be actually responding to someone wanting to, let's say, bully them out. But so I don't think India would need to listen to anybody. But yes, if gestures are made in a different way, it's more diplomatic, it's more suggestive and in more friendly manner, in give and take, I think it could listen.
Leigh-Ann, India relies on Russian crude oil, which Delhi has continued to buy at a discounted rate to support its economy. Is India funding Russia's war against Ukraine by doing this?
I think it's a very far-fetched statement to say that India is funding the Ukraine war or Russia-Ukraine war. And why has this kind of come now is the question. If you look at the statistics, as India depends, 85% of its energy needs or crude oil needs are dependent on importing the oil. And if you see at what's happening just in April to September 2025, the oil imports from India, the crude oil imports from Russia, have gone down from 40% to 36%. And they are more to do with the fact that the discount that Russia was giving has substantially come down. So it's a lot to do with what the needs and how the energy needs are met by India. Also, India is not the only one buying oil from Russia. It's Middle East, it's Turkey, and many other, and Europe is buying huge amount of gas from Russia, which has, one could say, been also contributing to the war. So it's not as simple as geopolitics and say suddenly India is the one that is fronting this war. But it is a lot to do with economic optics, and also the fact that the US wants India to be buying more defense and more crude oil from them, and which India has actually increased in the past. The April to September, as I mentioned, the import from the US has gone up, and import from Middle East has gone up to 45%, if I'm not wrong. So it is a little bit too far-fetched to say that India is the one that is the reason for this war to carry on. There are many, many more reasons.
And it's really interesting because we talk there about what happens if India stops buying Russian oil, but you made it very clear that lots of other countries are still buying oil from Russia, including Europe, which has been a criticism that has fallen on the Europeans. Is this a global effort that we need to stop the war in Ukraine?
Absolutely. And I think it is an opportunity that President Trump has been saying that he has stopped God knows how many wars. I think this is an opportunity. Zelensky is coming. They might want, that's where the efforts are required, and not to digress the attention to India fronting this war or anyone else fronting this war. No, the efforts have to go into diplomatic dialogue that needs to happen. And also, can I just say, if India today stopped buying oil from Russia, like immediately, cold turkey now, then it has to buy oil from elsewhere, because it, as I said, it depends, 85% of its domestic needs depends on importing the oil. What will happen? It will increase the oil prices in the market, which will increase inflation in everywhere else, including the US. So it's not as simple, and that's why Biden administration had capped the price, oil price, the crude oil price for India. And it has agreed and has been doing, working in that cap. So it is not as simple as saying that stop oil India and the war is going to stop. If that was to happen, a world would be a better place. There are many more things. It's a concerted effort that oil dependency has to decrease on X number of countries. There has to be more diplomatic dialogue. President Trump has an opportunity with Zelensky tomorrow. So, and whole Europe has been trying, in fairness, and there's gas needs. It has been trying to scale down its dependency, and it has done well. And so is India. India is also scaling down its dependency on crude oil. It is trying to make in India, well, it can't make oil in India, but it's trying renewable energy. There are a lot of efforts towards renewable energy, which is why the crude oil dependency on other countries is reducing as well. But we can't have simplistic answers to very complex geopolitical, economic problems like the war, which has been going on for now 4 years. And I still remember being reporting on the first day. So, yeah.
Very valid point, Lavina Tandon. It's been great to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For more on this, I'm joined by Derek Grossman, Professor of International Relations at the University of Southern California. It's a pleasure to have you on this evening. Thank you so much for your time, Derek. Derek, let's just start with a simple question. Can the US president really pressure New Delhi to give up buying Russian oil?
Well, thanks for having me again. It's great to see you. Yeah, I mean, I think the president is certainly trying to accomplish that, but will it work in reality? I mean, probably not. As your previous speaker pointed out, India is pretty against any country bullying it, as most countries are, but India is particularly interested in pushing back and ensuring its own not only non-alignment, but its own, sovereignty and territorial integrity. And those types of things, I think, make it such that India is going to be a very hard nut to crack. Now, that said, the United States has got obviously lots of different levers that it can pull in order to make India's life more difficult. And I think we saw that a few months ago when President Trump decided to not only put reciprocal tariffs at 25% on India, but an additional 25% tariffs as punitive tariffs for India's continued import of discounted barrels of Russian oil. So, but now look, the numbers show that that has not worked, right? That India continues to import discounted barrels of Russian oil at the same clip thereabout. There may have been a slight dip in the numbers, but certainly nothing that you could point to as, this is real proof that the policy is working. And so I think Trump is now going to maybe try some other tactics, such as what we, saw yesterday with him saying that India has agreed to stop importing those discounted barrels of Russian oil, right? It's kind of this is a Trumpist way of doing things, right? Making an announcement without actually having an agreement, and then putting public pressure on the country in question to actually make good on Trump's public announcement. I think it's kind of a strategy that doesn't really make sense. It's putting the cart before the horse. And like your previous speaker also said, I mean, it is a bullying tactic, which India never takes kindly to.
Derek, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that 25% that you did mention there, because if Modi agrees to stop buying Russian oil, could we see the US remove the extra 25% tariff it put on India for refusing to stop buying Russian oil, if that makes any sense? Because I think that's a big question happening, because we know India now has 50%, but possibly this could be the way of them negotiating to have less tariffs on the country, and possibly Donald Trump could use that.
Yeah, well, I think, in private discussions between India and the U.S., whether it's Modi and Trump in the past or, at a lower level, there certainly is this notion that, or I guess agreement, that India over time will start to buy less Russian oil, right? And we're actually we're not there yet, but maybe by the end of this year into next year, assuming that the war is still going on between Russia and Ukraine, having India spend less money on Russian oil and more money on American oil and oil from other sources, I think that's certainly the goal. And India has intimated that, but at the same time, it's a longer term process. Because of the way the global supply chain works, right? It's not easy to just say, okay, we're gonna stop doing it right now and that's it, right? I mean, it's got a long lag time. Also, there's the issues of the last few months, right, where Trump has taken a wrecking ball to the U.S.-India relationship. And so the political optics don't really help India making that sort of decision in this particular moment, or at least publicizing that it is. I think another factor here that we haven't talked about yet is the likely potential, I would say, for a U.S.-India free trade agreement. And that's something that Trump has really wanted. My understanding, and Modi wants it as well, my understanding is that there is a draft agreement that is basically waiting to be signed, right? So the two leaders, whenever they meet next, my understanding is Trump won't be going to India for the Quad this month, right? It may bleed into next year. But whenever the two leaders meet again, I think one of the policy deliverables will be to sign this FTA. And that, I think, will make Trump more confident in the fact that India is remaining a close strategic partner in spite of what it's doing with Russia and maybe what it's doing with China. And then in that case, he's going to, I think, try to relieve some of those reciprocal tariffs and those punitive tariffs. We're all trying to psychoanalyze Trump, obviously, right? So this is all subject to change. He's very unpredictable. He's very transactional. He's highly personalistic. So everything is really up for change. But that's kind of my view of it.
It's really interesting because I do feel like we try to psychoanalyze Donald Trump and try to hang on every word and kind of make our own decision of what he's saying, or, you know, it's a difficult situation, and thank you for explaining that. But if we talk about those free trade agreements that could possibly come into play when the two leaders meet, we know an Indian delegation is currently in the US right now as I'm speaking to you for these trade negotiations that are happening. But there's still major sticking points over trade between India and the US when it comes to things like farming. What more do we know about that situation?
Yeah, not much publicly, right? We just know sort of broad, topics that are still of concern. But I think I would say it's encouraging to see that the Indian delegation is in DC as we speak to continue to have these conversations. Of course, the devil is always in the details of any agreement, right? But like I said, the agreement is basically done, right? It's a matter of hashing out some of the finer details, which I think at this point should be the easier part, given that both leaders broadly agree with the direction that this is going in.
I wish I knew what was in that agreement, Derek. But I also just wanted to...
Me too.
No, both of us together. When it comes up, we'll have to discuss it. But President Trump has been a very busy man of late, and he's holding a telephone conversation with Vladimir Putin at the moment. He was actually on Truth Social talking about it while it was going on. And of course, that comes ahead of this meeting he's going to have with Volodymyr Zelensky tomorrow. And it was interesting because just yesterday, Donald Trump said Russia's economy was on the brink of collapse. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is an opaque system we're dealing with in Russia, right? So it's kind of hard to know exactly what's happening there. I'm sure the president, through his President's Daily Brief and other intelligence briefings from the U.S. government and from the intelligence community in particular, are giving him kind of this analysis that Russia is in trouble. And so is, President Trump characterizing it exactly how it was described to him or written about in his briefing? That is hard to say. But I mean, for the fact that the president's saying that, I think there is something there, right? Something is going on, and we'll just have to kind of see how it plays out. But look, the India angle to it, right? I think your previous speaker had mentioned that India buying Russian oil doesn't support Russia's war in Ukraine. I would respectfully disagree. Right? It doesn't fully fund the war, but it certainly contributes to the cash flow that Russia needs in order to continue prosecuting the war, right? So from that vantage point, India certainly bears some level of culpability. But look, so does China, so do some of the European countries, right? So does anybody else who may be buying Russian oil or otherwise engaging Russia in violation of sanctions. So I'm not one who lives in a glass house, right? Because we know what happens when you throw stones and you live in a glass house.
Yeah, I do know what happens. But Derek, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. You mentioned China there, and China's really interesting because they obviously buy a huge volume of Russian oil. And China and Russia have always been quite closely aligned in many ways. Do you think Donald Trump will try to convince China to do the same thing, to stop buying Russian oil?
I mean, I think that's going to be part of the negotiations when he meets with Xi later this month on the sidelines of APEC in South Korea. But I mean, what are the real prospects of Xi Jinping doing that, especially when the U.S.-China relationship is still very strained? What's interesting, however, is that I think Trump wants some sort of reset with China. Right? Not just on trade, but on other strategic challenges as well, to include, dealing with Russia. And I think there's going to be some conversation, at least from the president, on that. But I mean, there's a couple things. One, how interested would she be in doing that? I think pretty uninterested, given what we've seen since Trump came back to office. But also, there's, I think, a question about the extent to which this is a good thing for global peace and stability, if there is, in fact, some sort of reset. Because normally I would say resets are good, great powers should get along, especially if they're nuclear armed. That ensures the safety and security of everybody, right? But in this particular case, Trump clearly has a spheres of influence view of the world that the U.S. essentially takes care of the Western Hemisphere, China takes care of East Asia, Russia takes care of Central Asia and parts of Eastern Europe, hopefully not too much of Eastern Europe that goes into NATO, right? And then India takes care of South Asia and so on and so forth, right? The fallacy here is to think that everybody can just stay on in their respective corner of the planet and never really interact. But as you know very well, and as I'm sure most of our viewers know, we live in a globalized, highly interconnected society. And so it simply doesn't make sense. And in fact, a spheres of influence approach, right, that bends and breaks the international rules-based order, right, that's based on international law and norms of behavior. And that's exactly what Trump is interested in doing. Okay, that only will precipitate greater empire building by each of the great powers, and inevitably they will have more frictions with each other. And it's just, I mean, I can't help but point out the similarities between today's situation and the run-up to World War I and World War II. It was very similar in the sense that you had competing great powers. They were imperialist and colonial, no doubt, right? But they were still great powers that sought to offset each other and kind of stay in their own neighborhoods. How did that turn out? Not so well.
Derek Grossman, it's always fascinating to speak to you. I always feel like I learn so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Leigh-Ann. Take care.
Yeah. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Russia has launched over 300 drones and about 36 missiles across Ukraine overnight, hitting energy infrastructure and emergency services. Ukrainian President Zelensky said the strike included Kharkiv's state emergency service and left several wounded. A new report blames poor engineering and a lack of testing for the Titan submarine's deadly implosion during a 2023 dive to the Titanic. The NTSB says OceanGate's design was inadequate and the sub should never have made the trip. All 5 on board, including the company's CEO, were killed. A lawsuit has been filed in the UK against Johnson & Johnson, accusing the company of knowingly selling baby powder contaminated with asbestos. The claim involves 3,000 people and alleges the firm was aware of the risks for decades but failed to warn consumers. J&J denies the allegations, saying its products meet regulatory standards and did not cause cancer. The family of Oscar-winning actress Diane Keaton has confirmed she died from pneumonia. Keaton passed away on Saturday at the age of 79. Her family have suggested people make donations to food banks or animal shelters in her memory. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has survived 2 no-confidence votes in Parliament today following his pledge to suspend Macron's pension plan. After the vote, he told reporters he's relieved and that the debates on the budget and other challenges will start now. We can now go live to Brussels to speak to our correspondent there, William Denslow. William, brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you for your time. So, embattled Sébastien Lecornu lives to fight another day. Was it surprising that he survived 2 no-confidence votes?
Well, Sébastien Lecornu had certainly made a major concession to try and survive these 2 no-confidence votes. The biggest concession that was made is that he agreed to freeze a plan to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. So that pause on pension reform was seen as a huge concession for the left-leaning parts of France's Parliament. Now, that appears to have just done the trick. It was an incredibly close vote, the one that was brought forward by the left-wing France Unbound. 271 French members of Parliament voted against Lecornu's premiership, just 18 short of the majority that they needed. There was then a vote brought forward by the right-wing National Rally. Now, that did far less well, with just 144 votes. So that one came nowhere close. But the significant one, that challenge saved by the left in France, that was narrowly avoided for Sébastien Lecornu. He says, let's get back to work. The major challenge for him next is passing that French budget.
Exactly, and that's my next question to you. Lecornu survived after his pledges, you just said to me, to suspend pension reforms, which won him the support of left-wing MPs. But, William, what challenges still remain when it comes to passing this budget?
Enormous challenges. It is an incredibly fractious time in French politics. Just putting this all into context, there have been 5 prime ministers in roughly 5 years. Lecornu is already in his second stint, if you want to look at it this way. His first one lasting just 26 days, where a few days ago he tendered his resignation. That was then batted back to him by French President Emmanuel Macron, essentially asking him to have another go for the sake of this centrist coalition. Lecornu has blamed all factions for putting essentially their interests over the French good, and to make more compromises. So he is very much appealing to the French members of parliament to do just that going forward as part of this budget issue. But the economic challenges for France are incredibly stark. They rank the 3rd highest in the Eurozone when it comes to public debt. Their debt is now 114% of GDP, so there are certainly seen as needs to see some degree of budget reform, but huge resistance from all sides on how to achieve that.
And the big question is, where does this leave President Emmanuel Macron and the fragile coalition?
It is incredibly fragile. The fact of the matter is that no single party in the French parliament has a majority, which means that coalition politics are somewhat required, but that is really not a given in France, certainly not in this incredibly divisive political climate, with both the far left and the far right having sizable stakes in government. So that really means that there's plenty of kind of hand-to-hand negotiating with individual MEPs, rather than the chance for Mr. Lecornu or Emmanuel Macron to deal with direct blocks or big blocks of votes. So that just shows how difficult it will be. When it comes to Emmanuel Macron's position, well, he has until 2027 when the presidential elections come around. That'll be his final term in office back in 2027. But big questions remain. Will he be able to get there? There are huge calls for parliamentary elections yet again. Some are even calling for an early resignation for the French president to try and break this impasse. So there are huge hopes, as far as Emmanuel Macron and his supporters are concerned, that the Lecornu government will hold, and that there'll be a degree of stability at least until 2027, when the hopes are that the French electorate can go back to the polls. But given this instability, it seems very likely indeed, based on the last few years, that the French electorate will be needed to vote again well before then.
And what has been the reaction from opposition parties in France?
Well, essentially from the left, they feel that the Socialist Party did a deal with Macron's centrist party. There is displeasure there that this cave-in, as they see it, on pension reforms was enough to get their vote to avoid another election. So there's disappointment from the far left of French politics. As far as the National Rally is concerned, the far right, the party of Marine Le Pen, well, they have said over the past few days that the only way to resolve this is either the resignation of the French president, or at the very least for the French electorate to go back to the polls for parliamentary elections. So not much signs of coming together for the far left, the far right. The real question is, can Sébastien Lecornu thread the needle and keep his very fragile government in check as they go through the tricky task of trying to get this budget passed?
Those are the big questions. William Denslow in Brussels, thank you so much for joining us. A reminder of our top stories. An Israeli politician has called on Benjamin Netanyahu to halt all parts of the agreement with Hamas until the remaining bodies of the hostages are returned. But Hamas says it needs specialist equipment to find them. President Trump says Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying Russian oil as he holds a call with Putin. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has survived 2 no-confidence votes in Parliament after he pledged to suspend Macron's pension plan. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. And we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.